It was 3:54 a.m. in Moscow when the silence of the night was torn apart by a string of explosions. Within minutes, the horizon burned red. Towers of flame rising from refineries that once powered one of the world's largest energy empires. In a single night, billions of dollars in assets vanished, and with them, a piece of Russia's industrial confidence. But this was no random act of destruction. It was the latest strike in a new kind of war. One fought not only with missiles and troops, but with economics, precision, and patience. As refineries burn and pipelines fall silent, a question emerges. Can a superpower survive when its greatest strength becomes its weakest link?
What is happening?
Tonight, military Worldline news takes you inside the event that shocked global energy markets and exposed the fragile heart of Russia's power grid. It began just before dawn, 3:54 a.m. Moscow time. Across the stillness of the Russian interior, a deep, rolling thunder split the sky. Residents of Perm and Bashkortostan awoke to the sound of shattering glass and the dull glow of distant fires. Within minutes, emergency sirens blared across multiple provinces as towering pillars of flame pierced the darkness. What followed was one of the largest coordinated drone attacks inside Russian territory since the start of the conflict, a firestorm in the industrial belt. At least dozens of Ukrainian long-range drones reportedly took flight from launch sites deep within Ukrainian-controlled regions. Designed for precision and endurance, they crossed over 1,500 kilometers of Russian airspace before descending on their targets: refineries, fuel depots, and critical power nodes. These weren't random strikes. They were surgical hits aimed at the very arteries of Russia's energy system. By sunrise, the industrial skyline of Perm and Bashkortostan was ablaze. Massive fireballs engulfed refining towers and storage tanks, while emergency services struggled to contain flames spreading through interconnected pipelines. Video footage posted to Telegram and local media showed shockwaves rolling across factory compounds, scattering debris and igniting smaller fires kilometers away. The visual impact was staggering, a wall of fire visible from space, according to early satellite imagery. Within hours, Russia's energy backbone, the infrastructure that powers its economy and sustains its war effort, was under siege. The immediate fallout. Preliminary reports from regional officials estimated that up to 10% of remaining refining capacity had been knocked offline in a single night. Combined with earlier attacks in August and September, nearly half of Russia's total oil processing network was now either destroyed or severely damaged. For a country that relies on fuel exports to fund military operations, the timing could not have been worse. The financial toll was immense. Energy analysts in Europe placed direct damages from the morning's operation at around $500 million, bringing the cumulative total of Ukraine's long-range drone campaign to over $5.6 billion. While Moscow's Ministry of Defense claimed to have intercepted most of the drones, independent imagery told a different story. Smoldering craters, burned-out control rooms, and flames still licking at the edges of fuel reservoirs more than 12 hours later. A nation on alert. Across several provinces, state emergency alerts were triggered simultaneously. Fire brigades, many already stretched thin, were dispatched from neighboring regions. In the chaos, local governors issued quiet orders to impose fuel rationing, a move intended to prevent panic buying, but one that only fueled more anxiety. Social media quickly filled with videos of motorists queuing for hours at gas stations, some pushing empty vehicles, others arguing with attendants about dwindling supplies. The sense of unease spread faster than the fires themselves. Ordinary citizens, many of whom had long viewed the war as distant, were suddenly facing its consequences at home. By midday, the Kremlin released a short statement describing the situation as a contained industrial incident. Yet, satellite heat maps and live-streamed footage suggested a far broader crisis. In the background, economists and analysts began to realize what had just happened. Russia's energy fortress had been breached from within. The precision of asymmetry. The drones used in these strikes were small, roughly the size of a light aircraft, but deadly efficient. Each carried around 200 kilograms of high explosive payload, guided by satellite navigation to hit critical components with pinpoint accuracy. Unlike missiles, they flew low, slow, and often beneath radar coverage, making them difficult to intercept. Military observers called this operation an example of asymmetric precision warfare. Rather than confront Russia's massive air defense network head-on, Ukraine targeted the soft underbelly, economic infrastructure too vast to guard completely. One well-placed detonation could shut down an entire refining unit for weeks, sometimes months, due to the scarcity of spare parts under international sanctions. It was, in essence, an economic earthquake disguised as a series of explosions, strategic shockwaves. For decades, Russia's energy industry had been more than an economic asset. It was a symbol of national power. Oil and gas exports fueled state budgets, subsidized domestic programs, and bolstered its influence abroad. To the Kremlin, energy was not merely a resource, it was a weapon of diplomacy and deterrence. But the strikes of that early morning changed the narrative. What had long been seen as an impenetrable shield now looked vulnerable, even brittle. Every refinery that goes dark, one European energy analyst remarked, is another crack in the foundation of Moscow's war economy. Within 24 hours, global oil markets reacted cautiously, watching for signs of production slow down. Russian officials insisted exports would remain stable, but traders noted price fluctuations and insurance premiums rising for shipments originating from vulnerable regions. The human dimension. In cities like Ufa, Kirov, and Yekaterinburg, the economic tremors were immediate. Gas prices surged overnight, some stations tripling their rates. Public buses idled in depots, unable to refuel. Farmers in agricultural provinces postponed harvest logistics as diesel stocks ran dry. For many Russians, this wasn't just a national headline, it was an everyday struggle. Inside supermarkets, deliveries slowed. Construction projects stalled for lack of transport fuel. Even the aviation sector began feeling the squeeze. Several regional airlines quietly cut routes to conserve limited jet fuel. In the face of official denials, the reality on the ground spoke louder than policy statements: crisis management or damage control. Behind closed doors, Russia's emergency management agency convened high-level meetings to coordinate containment and repair. State television aired footage of firefighters extinguishing flames, but reports later confirmed that some blazes continued for more than 24 hours. Experts warned that repairing damaged refineries would not be quick or cheap. Many of the catalytic units and electrical systems relied on imported components that were now inaccessible under sanctions. "You can rebuild a wall," said one Russian energy engineer anonymously, "but you can't replace Western refining software overnight." That technical dependency, long overlooked, had now become a strategic weakness, beyond the flames. By the end of the day, black smoke still drifted over the industrial corridors of the Urals. The fires, though mostly contained, left behind more than physical wreckage. They exposed a truth that had been quietly forming since the first drone crossed the border months earlier. The war had reached the heart of Russia's economy. Energy analysts called it a turning point. For the first time, Ukraine's strikes were not merely retaliatory or symbolic. They were systemic and cumulative, each one degrading Russia's long-term capacity to refine, store, and distribute fuel. Even as Moscow promised recovery, its logistical arteries were bleeding, pipelines damaged, refineries crippled, and the public increasingly restless. In Perm, one refinery worker summed up the feeling shared by many: "We thought the war was far away, now it's right above our heads." The dawn after. As the sun rose over a skyline choked with smoke, the images told a story words could barely capture. A superpower forced to confront its own fragility. The day had begun like countless others in Russia's industrial belt, but it ended with a realization that the war's front line no longer lay hundreds of kilometers away. It was here, among the burning steel and broken pipelines, that the next phase of the conflict had arrived. One measured not in captured ground, but in the silent, steady collapse of energy and confidence. For Russia, this was more than a night of explosions. It was a warning, a test, and perhaps the beginning of a long, uncertain reckoning. In the wake of the early morning inferno, the world's attention shifted from the explosions themselves to the deeper implications of what they represented. This was not merely a tactical strike. It was the manifestation of a new doctrine of economic warfare. Ukraine's drone campaign had moved beyond testing boundaries. It was now methodically dismantling Russia's industrial lifeline. Every refinery hit, every storage facility disabled, was a calculated step in a broader strategy designed to stretch Moscow's capacity and strike at the financial arteries sustaining its military machine. The strategy behind the blows. For years, Russia's war effort has relied on energy exports to fuel its economy. Oil, diesel, and gas not only fund the national budget, but also pay for logistics, munitions, and soldiers' wages. Recognizing this dependency, Ukrainian planners and intelligence units appear to have shifted from a purely military confrontation to a hybrid campaign, one that uses precision drones as instruments of attrition. Instead of focusing on frontline victories, these strikes target the infrastructure behind the battlefield. Each drone, costing a fraction of a conventional missile, has the potential to cause millions in damage. By striking refineries, terminals, and electrical substations, Kyiv aims to degrade Russia's long-term ability to convert crude oil into the refined products that keep its tanks moving and its aircraft flying. The logic is clear. If you cannot stop the army directly, you choke the fuel that moves it. A war of economics. This campaign has become one of the most cost-effective operations in modern warfare. Small, relatively inexpensive aircraft inflict enormous economic losses. Energy experts estimate that the cumulative cost of damage from the drone strikes now exceeds $5.5 billion, while the drones themselves may total only a few million in manufacturing and deployment expenses. That disparity is what makes these attacks so powerful. They invert the traditional cost equation of war. Each refinery is a complex ecosystem of catalytic converters, cracking towers, and control systems, all sensitive, all vulnerable. When one of those elements is destroyed, the facility cannot simply resume work the next day. Repairing even a single processing unit can take months, especially under sanctions that block imports of Western technology and parts. Without access to foreign catalysts, heat exchangers, or refining software, Russian engineers are forced to improvise with outdated Soviet-era substitutes. In practice, that means slower production, lower efficiency, and greater risk. The ripple effect across the economy. By mid-October, the results of this campaign were visible across Russia's domestic economy. Fuel prices in several provinces surged by 20 to 40%, with isolated regions reporting even sharper spikes. In Yakutia and Kirov, some gas stations ran dry altogether. Farmers struggled to obtain diesel for harvesting machinery. Bus services in smaller towns cut routes, and airlines began reducing flights to conserve limited jet fuel reserves. Construction projects slowed as heavy equipment sat idle. Behind closed doors, regional governors were told to introduce rationing policies, though publicly they described these measures as temporary logistical adjustments. In many areas, lines at fuel stations stretched for kilometers, with frustrated drivers accusing local officials of hoarding supplies for military convoys. The crisis did not stop at the pump. As refining output dropped, Russia's electricity network began to feel the strain. The energy deficit widened to nearly 25 gigawatts, forcing more than 40 regions to impose restrictions during peak hours. Factories in Siberia, the Far East, and the Central Industrial Belt were ordered to operate at partial capacity. Reports of rolling blackouts started to surface, short, sporadic outages at first, then longer disruptions lasting several hours. A system under stress energy analysts warn that Russia's infrastructure is facing a perfect storm, sanctions limiting parts, corruption draining maintenance budgets, and now precision strikes destroying irreplaceable assets. What began as short-term disruptions is now evolving into a systemic collapse. Experts describe the situation as a feedback loop. Each drone strike reduces refining capacity. Reduced refining capacity cuts export revenue. Diminished revenue weakens the government's ability to finance repairs. The cycle repeats, tightening the noose around the energy sector, the very foundation of Russia's economy. Even facilities that escaped direct hits are not spared. Many depend on long-distance pipelines, storage depots, or electrical substations that have been damaged elsewhere. The result is a chain reaction of inefficiencies, a slow-motion paralysis spreading through the network. One senior European energy consultant summarized it bluntly: Russia's refineries are no longer just targets, they're liabilities. Everyone offline multiplies the strain on those still running. Moscow's balancing act. Inside the Kremlin, officials continue to downplay the crisis. Daily briefings describe the situation as manageable, and the Ministry of Energy promises rapid recovery. Yet the numbers tell a different story. Production is lagging, exports are down, and internal fuel demand continues to climb. In public, the government projects calm. In private, it is ordering regional authorities to prioritize shipments to military installations and critical industries, even at the expense of civilian supply. Meanwhile, Moscow's strategic posture abroad remains unchanged. Despite domestic shortages, the state nuclear agency, Rosatom, is expanding energy investment projects across Africa and the Middle East. Billions are being funneled overseas, a move that some analysts interpret as an attempt to preserve geopolitical influence, even as ordinary Russians wait in fuel queues at home. Economists call this the paradox of power, a nation projecting strength abroad while quietly losing stability at home. The human consequences. For the average citizen, the war's cost is no longer abstract. It's the empty fuel tank, the delayed delivery, the cold apartment when power flickers out. In industrial towns, shift workers arrive to find their factories idled for lack of energy. In rural villages, families stockpile wood and coal, fearing a winter of unreliable electricity. Social media platforms, though heavily moderated, overflow with sarcasm and frustration. Hashtags like Dark Winter and Fuel for the Front trend intermittently before being scrubbed. Beneath the humor lies a growing fatigue, a realization that the war's economic front is no longer distant. One post from a resident in Belgorod summed up the sentiment: "We were told everything is under control, but the lights keep going out." Analysts weigh. In military, strategists describe this drone campaign as a shift from tactical warfare to structural warfare. Unlike bombing campaigns of the past that sought to destroy armies or cities, this one seeks to reshape the conditions under which an economy can sustain a conflict. Every refinery taken offline, every grid destabilized, chips away at Russia's long-term endurance. It forces the government to divert defense budgets toward reconstruction, stretches logistics thin, and fuels internal discontent. International observers note that while such strikes don't produce immediate battlefield victories, they erode the foundation that allows large-scale combat to continue. Over time, this can be more decisive than any single offensive. One Ukrainian official described it as the slow suffocation of a war machine, a fragile future. By late autumn, the consequences of this strategy had become impossible to ignore. Russia's refining output was nearly half of pre-war levels, and industry experts warned recovery could take years, not months. Even if repairs begin, sanctions on Western equipment and software will make restoration an uphill battle. Energy exports, once a pillar of economic confidence, now represent a vulnerability. The very system that powered decades of growth has become a source of instability. The full impact is still unfolding, but one thing is clear. Ukraine's campaign has redefined the scope of modern conflict. No longer limited to trenches and artillery, the war now extends deep into economic systems and global supply chains. Each drone that crosses the border carries not only explosives, but a message that in the age of hybrid warfare, the true battleground is as much financial as it is physical. And for Russia, this new battlefield is proving far harder to control. By the time the last flames were extinguished in Perm and Bashkortostan, The world had begun to realize that the battlefield was changing. What had once been a war of artillery and trenches was evolving into something far more complex, a contest fought through technology, precision, and endurance. The explosions that rocked Russia's energy grid were not simply acts of destruction. They were symbols of a transformation in how nations wage war in the 21st century. The rise of the drone revolution. At the center of this transformation is the drone, a machine that has turned the logic of warfare upside down. Compact, adaptable, and inexpensive, these aircraft have become the cornerstone of Ukraine's evolving strategy. Each drone represents months of iterative design, open-source software fused with locally produced components, guided by GPS systems, and powered by lightweight engines. While Russia relies heavily on traditional missiles and centralized defense systems, Ukraine's strength lies in distributed innovation. Civilian engineers, startups, and small defense labs collaborate in what some analysts describe as a digital insurgency. The result is an agile production network capable of producing hundreds of long-range drones per month, fast enough to replace losses and sophisticated enough to reach targets over 1,000 kilometers away. This model has allowed Ukraine to fight a technological war of attrition without matching Russia's sheer military scale. Each new wave of drones grows more intelligent, faster, and more precise. One Western military observer commented that Ukraine has turned the drone from a reconnaissance tool into an economic equalizer. Russia's expanding defense challenge. For Moscow, the challenge is immense. Defending one of the world's largest territories against small, low-flying objects is like trying to catch smoke with a net. In recent months, Russian air defense units have been redeployed from frontline regions to industrial zones deeper inside the country. The Kremlin has ordered layered radar systems, anti-air batteries, and electronic jamming devices to protect refineries, power plants, and logistical hubs. Yet, for every defense system moved inland, another area closer to the front becomes exposed. This trade-off is precisely what Ukraine's planners intended. By forcing Russia to spread its defenses thin, Kyiv not only stretches the Kremlin's military budget, but also reduces protection for troops in contested areas. As one defense analyst put it, every refinery that needs guarding means one fewer shield for the battlefield. Despite official claims of successful interceptions, open-source videos and satellite imagery reveal frequent hits. Fireballs light up refineries, power substations, and rail depots even in heavily defended zones. Each explosion underscores an uncomfortable truth. Complete defense is impossible in a war defined by mobility and surprise, psychological warfare, and public perception. Beyond the physical damage, these attacks are changing something deeper, the psychological landscape of the conflict. For much of the war, the Russian public experienced it as a distant event. The front lines were hundreds of kilometers away, and life in most cities continued as normal. That illusion is now cracking. The sight of empty fuel stations, rising transportation costs, and sporadic power cuts has brought the war home in ways propaganda cannot fully conceal. Social media platforms, even under strict monitoring, have become outlets for public frustration. Viral posts show long queues at petrol stations or darkened city blocks. Some comment sarcastically about temporary inconveniences, while others voice open concern. The phrase "dark winter" has become a quiet metaphor for the country's mood, a blend of fatigue, uncertainty, and growing skepticism toward official reassurances. Meanwhile, international observers note a subtle but visible shift in morale. Russian citizens who once viewed energy exports as proof of national strength now see refineries burning and blackouts spreading. Each outage, each delay in fuel delivery erodes confidence in a government that once promised stability through energy abundance. The military implications of infrastructure warfare. From a strategic standpoint, Ukraine's focus on infrastructure marks a profound evolution in modern conflict. In the past, wars were defined by territory, the capture of cities, the control of borders. Today, the emphasis has shifted to systems, energy grids, data lines, logistics routes, and manufacturing hubs. Disabling these networks weakens an enemy far more efficiently than capturing land. Energy shortages slow tank production, limit troop mobility, and inflate costs. Supply bottlenecks ripple outward, affecting every sector: agriculture, transportation, and defense logistics alike. Military experts call this the systemic approach to modern warfare. Instead of targeting soldiers directly, it targets the infrastructure that enables them to fight. It's a strategy designed to outlast, not outgun, a superior adversary. Ukraine's use of small, precise drones embodies this philosophy. A single strike on a transformer station or refining unit can halt operations worth millions. Each attack forces engineers to rebuild, consuming time and resources Russia can no longer easily afford. And with sanctions cutting off access to Western components, every destroyed facility becomes a symbol of long-term attrition. The global military lesson. The implications extend far beyond Eastern Europe. Defense analysts around the world are re-evaluating what these strikes reveal about the future of warfare. The Ukraine-Russia conflict has demonstrated that state power no longer depends solely on the size of an army, but on its adaptability, the ability to harness new technology faster than its opponent. Drones, cyber tools, and precision-guided weapons are now the backbone of modern strategy. Nations in Asia, the Middle East, and Europe are quietly studying Ukraine's tactics. Militaries are revising doctrines, investing in counter-drone systems, and rethinking how to safeguard critical infrastructure. What was once the domain of elite air forces is becoming accessible to smaller powers, even non-state actors, capable of deploying low-cost, high-impact systems. The lesson is stark. The next wars may be fought less over land and more over systems of survival. Energy grids, refineries, and data networks will be the new battlegrounds, and whichever side adapts faster will hold the upper hand. Inside the shadow war, unconfirmed intelligence reports suggest that both Russia and Ukraine are now racing to enhance their drone fleets with artificial intelligence and longer range. Each new model brings fresh challenges to air defense units and new vulnerabilities to critical infrastructure. Experts warn that as these systems become more autonomous, future wars could see swarms of drones overwhelming even advanced defense networks, a concept once confined to military theory now inching closer to reality. Russia has begun experimenting with its own long-range drones, aiming to retaliate in kind. Yet Western sanctions have made it difficult for Moscow to scale production or acquire key electronic components. Ukraine, meanwhile, continues to expand its domestic production base, leveraging private innovation and foreign technical aid. It is, in essence, an arms race conducted in the shadows, a technological Cold War inside a hot one. The new face of asymmetry, the shift in strategy, reveals something fundamental about power in the modern era. Quantity no longer guarantees dominance. A large army can be drained by small, persistent strikes. A vast economy can be disrupted by targeted precision. And the tools to achieve that disruption, drones, code, and cyber operations, are increasingly within reach of nations that once stood defenseless against larger powers. In this light, Ukraine's campaign is more than a military tactic. It's a proof of concept for a new model of resistance. It shows that innovation, when combined with strategy, can rival brute force. Every explosion in Russia's industrial belt is not only a physical event, but a data point in the evolution of warfare, a demonstration that the balance of power in the 21st century belongs to those who innovate the fastest. The age of silent weapons. As analysts often note, the weapons of tomorrow may not roar, but hum softly through the night. They will fly unseen across borders, guided by algorithms instead of pilots, targeting the lifelines that sustain nations. In that sense, the early morning strikes that crippled Russia's energy grid are not just part of one conflict. They are the blueprint of a future battlefield where silence, precision, and persistence decide who endures. For now, as refineries smolder and the lights flicker across the Russian heartland, one thing is clear. The front lines of war are no longer drawn on maps. They're etched across the invisible networks that keep the modern world alive. As the smoke settles over the refineries of the Russian interior, the meaning of this moment becomes clear. What began as a handful of distant explosions has grown into something far larger, a demonstration that the power of a nation no longer lies only in its armies, but in its ability to protect the systems that keep it alive. The war has entered a new phase, one defined by technology, precision, and the relentless contest for energy dominance. Ukraine's drone campaign has reshaped the modern understanding of warfare. It has proven that with ingenuity and persistence, a smaller force can challenge a larger adversary by striking not at soldiers, but at supply chains and economies. For Russia, the challenge is no longer just on the battlefield, it is at home, where energy shortages, economic strain, and public anxiety test the limits of endurance. This is more than a story about fuel and fire. It is a portrait of a changing world order, one where innovation replaces intimidation, and where the quiet hum of a drone can carry the weight of a nation's resolve. If you want to stay informed about these pivotal developments, where technology, defense, and global strategy intersect, subscribe to Military Worldline News. Join us as we continue to analyze the shifting frontiers of power, uncover the strategies behind modern warfare, and bring clarity to the conflicts shaping our world today.